Now we're going to move on to this concept of disaffirmed preferences. Now, what is this? I know you're asking. You're saying, Nick, just tell me already, Well, here we are. A trustee in a bankruptcy case has the power to disaffirm or set aside preferential payments made to creditors before the bankruptcy petition was filed. Think of this like a clawback. That's something, if you're familiar with, in investments in the investing world. If I am a fund manager and I don't make the required return I needed to for my investors that year, they have the ability sometimes to claw that payment back, in which case it would be returned to them. So that's what's kind of going on here. The reason this exists is because when we are going through bankruptcy and maybe I want to maintain better relations with a certain creditor, I pay them first, right? But the whole point of this bankruptcy process is that it is going to be fair to everyone. It's kind of puts the automatic stay on everything. And from that point, we say, all right, let's fairly distribute. So if you, as the person going through bankruptcy, try to kind of, let's say, sneak a payment, or, maybe you're not even trying to sneak a payment, you're just making normal payments to creditors, the court could claw that back, take that money back to ensure fairness among creditors and prevent preferential treatment of certain creditors over others. Kind of like, let's bring it all back home and deal with it in-house. Now, setting aside a preferential payment means that the payment is taken back from the creditor who received it, and the funds become part of the bankruptcy estate. I'll just give a random example. Let's say I pay $100 to a utility company. Maybe that amount is clawed back. That amount probably wouldn't be clawed back, but just saying, if that was like 10 days before I declared bankruptcy, that might be clawed back. That's just an example here. This process allows the bankruptcy trustee to recover and redistribute those payments, ensuring equitable distribution among all creditors and maintaining the integrity of the bankruptcy process. Now, a preferential payment is a transfer made by the debtor before filing for bankruptcy that meets the following criteria. Right? This is also similar to that concept of selling my car for $1 to my brother to avoid it being part of the bankruptcy estate. So it's just kind of like, all right, let's at this moment assess what we have and distribute it properly. Now, these are going to be the criteria. If it's made to or for the benefit of a creditor, which makes sense, that's what we're talking about here, on account of an antecedent debt, which was pre-existing of the debtor. So any debt that existed before this bankruptcy filing. Just keep in mind, let's say, you're going to incur debts after you file for bankruptcy. So that's a different story there. If it's made within 90 days prior to the filing of the petition, 1 year if the creditor is an insider, such as an officer or debtor organization or close relative of the debtor. You don't have to really worry about it in the parentheses too much there. But essentially, if it's made within 3 months of filing the bankruptcy petition, made while the debtor was insolvent, because at that point, you technically were kind of going through bankruptcy. That's the rationale there. And lastly, if it results in the creditor receiving more than they would have received under the bankruptcy code. It's kind of like if you overpay your taxes, you get a tax refund. That's kind of what's going on here. We don't want anyone getting a refund, essentially. We want them to get the correct amount properly. Now, preferential payments do not include contemporaneous exchanges or payments related to consumer debt of less than $600. This is kind of just saying, all right, let's not deal with amounts that are too little for us to worry about. Addressing these payments ensures fairness among creditors and maintains the integrity of the bankruptcy process. Now, exceptions to preferential payments include ordinary expenses such as bills or rent. All right, that's what I kind of mentioned. That was just a random example, just to paint a picture. And domestic support obligations. Remember, don't mess with the child support. Claims, unsecured creditors must file a proof of claim, and shareholders must file a proof of interest to have a right to payment. Failure to do it may result in no part of the distribution being allocated to them. So that's important. If you are a creditor to or an unsecured creditor to someone or an entity going through bankruptcy, you have to file a proof of claim, and then a shareholder has to file a proof of interest. Now, you could say, is that kind of not fair in the real world? Because maybe someone has an investment and they don't really know what's going on. There are a lot of individuals who just are not adept at bankruptcy, right? Let's say I'm investing and a company I invest in goes under. Do I know that I have to file a proof of interest? Well, hopefully it's communicated to me, but that's the world, right? The more education you have, the better off you'll fare against this. There's just too much going on in this world, too many rules to remember, too many laws, but hey, that is life. All right, let's talk about a couple more of these terms and see examples of them. Transfer. A transfer includes not only the payment of the money or the giving of property, but also the granting of a security interest. So that's, again, what we'll see as well when we have our lesson on those. The concept of transfer is crucial in identifying preferential payments. Now, a transfer includes not only the payment of money or the giving of property, but also the granting of a security interest. Now, by defining transfers broadly, the law ensures that various types of transactions that unfairly benefit certain creditors over others are scrutinized and, if necessary, set aside. Set aside or clawed back, whatever you need to do in that position, if it's been paid yet or transferred already. Examples of preferences here, well, we've got Bob, a store owner, owes Jane money. Now, a week before Bob filed for bankruptcy, he granted Jane a security interest in all of his store's wares, which Jane perfected. Jane's interest can be set aside as a preference because it's Bob giving preference to Jane. Maybe Jane is a good friend, but also a business partner, right? So dealing in inventory, this would be a preference. Now, talking about the antecedent debt rather than a contemporaneous exchange. Remember, this is debt that was accumulated before the bankruptcy was filed. A payment is a preference only if it is for an antecedent or a pre-existing debt. A contemporaneous exchange for new value is not a preference. Now, this basically contemporaneous at the same time, that's what that means. This concept helps differentiate between payments made for existing debts and those made for new value provided to the debtor. So if we enter into a new agreement, a financing agreement to buy a new car after the bankruptcy filing, that's dealt with separately. Payments made for that antecedent debts could be preferential payments, as they might unfairly favor certain creditors. In contrast, contemporaneous exchanges for new value do not constitute preferential payments, as they involve a new transaction where the debtor receives something in return for the payment, which is regular, just ordinary business dealings. An example here being days before Tina, a shop owner, filed for bankruptcy. She received 10 boxes of merchandise from Mark, who is a vendor. Tina paid for the merchandise in full upon delivery. There's no preference here, and as such, it's a contemporaneous exchange for value. Right? Paid it in full. There's no debt. There's no outstanding debt, anything like that. So there's no creditor situation here. That is a contemporaneous exchange, value provided for value. Insolvency. The debtor is presumed to be insolvent during the 90 days immediately preceding the date the bankruptcy petition is filed. Remember that. So talking a little bit more, you need to be insolvent in order to file for bankruptcy. The insolvency concept is vital because it's going to highlight the financial state of the debtor at the time of the preferential transfer. Now, additionally, it indicates that the debtor was unable to meet their financial obligations, and the preferential payment could have unfairly advantaged a specific creditor. Again, kind of questions could say the debtor was insolvent 60 days immediately before, just kind of mentioning that, just dissecting what you'll see in particular questions. Receipt of greater share. Now, a preference exists only if the creditor receives more than they would receive in a bankruptcy distribution. Therefore, payment to a fully secured creditor is not a preference because the creditor would have received the collateral and been paid in full anyway. Now, this is, again, dealing with the fairness of the payment. Secured creditors, unsecured creditors. Secured creditors, they have a right to, let's say, your car, because that's a secured transaction, whereas unsecured creditors, that would just be possibly the credit card company, right? If the creditor receives more through the preferential payment than they would have received in bankruptcy distribution, it is going to be considered a preference. Again, we want everyone to be treated fair and equitably, equally, all of that good stuff. Exceptions. These are exceptions, transfers that cannot be set aside by a trustee. Now, transfers in the ordinary course of business, kind of what we talked about. A transfer made to repay a debt that the debtor incurred in the ordinary course of business, that is not a voidable preference. Some transfers are exempt from being considered preferences to allow for the smooth functioning of businesses. For example, regular loan payments or payments of current bills are not considered preferences as they represent normal business transactions. By allowing these exceptions, the law ensures that businesses can continue to operate without the fear of having all of their payments scrutinized and potentially set aside during a bankruptcy process. You're just paying your utility bill. That is kind of what we're talking about here. Example of transfer in the ordinary course of business. A regular quarterly payment on a loan will not be set aside as a preference. Similarly, payment of a current phone bill or a current rent payment does not constitute a preference. Here we see chapter 15, and this is not really important for the exam. It's here. If you are interested, take a read. I'm not going to go over this. Essentially, this is dealing with foreign creditors, making sure that foreign creditors as well as domestic US-based creditors get equal treatment. Feel free to read it, but that is not really going to be worried about on the exam. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.